Hello again, everyone. I'm Father Joe Nazzle from Sandino Mission House in Berkeley. Several years ago, I met a religious sister who had several stories up her sleeve after teaching or tutoring first graders for more than 50 years. But one of the stories I recall had to do with accompanying a relative of hers who needed to do last-minute Christmas shopping on Christmas Eve at Kmart. So while she waited for her relative to finish her shopping, the sister noticed this woman sobbing near the checkout line. And she went over to her and asked if she could help. The woman told her that her mother was in the hospital and very sick, and she was very worried that she might lose her. So the sister just sat with her a while, tried to comfort her, asked her if she would like to pray with her. And so she prayed. And when they were finished, the woman wiped her tears away and said to the sister, "You know, it's really great of Kmart to hire people like you." Well, that religious sister, of course, wasn't hired to be compassionate. It was her basic instinct. She saw someone hurting, and she wanted to help. Our readings today remind us that compassion is rooted in love, and it's the primary motivation for people who are in relationship with God. Because as God tells Moses in today's first reading, "I am compassionate." Therefore, compassion is written on the hearts of all those who live in this covenant relationship with God. All the sacred rules of relationship that govern people's lives, all the holy ordinances that create community and communion out of chaos, they have a single source: compassion. The people are to treat one another with compassion as God has treated them and their ancestors. For example, when God says, "You shall not oppress or wrong a resident alien," the reason God says for such a law is simple, because the people of God were rescued from slavery in Egypt, and they were once aliens themselves. They knew what it meant to be slaves who were oppressed and treated unjustly. They knew what it meant to be a stranger in a strange land. They knew in their bones the pain of torture and terror because their ancestors had experienced it. Compassion begins by remembering where we've come from and the freedom that is won for us and for our ancestors in faith because of God's work. Because of the work of God's hands. It was God who did this. Don't ever forget it. And keeping that memory of God's compassion alive isn't for the sake of nostalgia, but it's really a call to action. In his response to the lawyers in today's gospel, Jesus condenses God's instructions to Moses into two basic precepts. Love God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus tells the people that the entire law and all the teachings of the prophets hang in the balance of these two sacred principles. Love God, love your neighbor. The instruction Jesus gives us today is simple and direct. This is all we have to memorize. This is all we have to know by heart. We're to love God because God loved us first. God loved us into being. God loved us into liberation. God loved us into relationship with God and each other. Because we have freely accepted God's love, we are to treat one another with compassion. Compassion and love are often learned in the hardest lessons of life, especially when we lose someone we love. I recall a story about a mother who lost one of her 4 children to cancer when her son was only 5 years old. And though she seldom spoke about it, she said that the death of her son changed her life forever and in very profound ways. The image that she used to describe that devastating and unacceptable loss was of a white fire roaring through her life and burning out whatever was superficial or frivolous or unimportant. and leaving behind a core of love. Compassion, like grace, is fierce and forgiving. It reveals this very core of love. There's nothing timid or shy about compassion, but compassion is also quiet and tender, without much fanfare or 15 minutes of fame. It is found in quiet acts of love, in random acts of kindness that unfold during the course of one's day, like that nun at Kmart on Christmas Eve. Compassionate presence means when another hurts, we're bruised. Compassion reflects a tenderness, but it also reflects a tenacity and a resilient spirit. Compassionate presence is not pity. It's not feeling sorry for someone else, because that places you above the other. No, compassion is a movement of the heart rather than an emotion. It's an act of will, not a whim or a wish or a feeling. In this way, it's like reconciliation and forgiveness. I choose to forgive someone. I choose to be reconciled. I choose to do good, to be compassionate, because that's who I am. That's my true self. That's my true identity. And to act contrary to my true nature as a compassionate person would be to act in violation of my true self, my relationship with God. But compassion is also about being vulnerable in another's presence. It means setting aside my own agenda or concerns and trying to be present to another, making room or making space for the other's pain, climbing out of my own comfort zone to comfort another in their loss. This past week, a new documentary was released in Rome called Francesco, in which Pope Francis made headlines around the world when he talked about civil unions for same-sex couples. Homosexual people have the right to be in a family, the Pope says in the documentary. We are all children of God, and we have a right to a family. Nobody should be thrown out or made miserable over it, the Pope said. And in the same documentary, according to American Magazine, Pope Francis called the current administration's policy of separating children at the border the cruelty at its highest form. The Pope said that separating kids from their parents goes against natural rights. It's something that a Christian cannot do, the Pope said. It's cruelty of the highest form. Since that zero-tolerance immigration policy was instituted in May 2018, before a judge struck it down or ruled to end the practice, more than 2,700 children were separated from their parents in less than a month. And yet we learned this week that 545 of those children have still not been reunited with their parents. Sister Norma Pimentel, the executive director of Catholic Charities in Brownsville, Texas, has worked with immigrant families for many years. And in the same documentary, Sister Norma describes the experience of visiting children separated from their parents in the detention center. Again, according to America, Sister Norma said, I was in the cells of the detention facility with children all around me, crying, and their faces full of tears. And I'm crying with them, she says. It was so amazing to feel the presence of each other, just embracing each other, and that woundedness of children needing their mother. The compassion of Pope Francis and Sister Norma are rooted in the scripture readings today. Their words and their witness reflect the most basic teaching of Jesus. You shall love your neighbor as yourself, for the love of our neighbor flows from our love for God and God's love for us. As people of faith, our call and our challenge are to love, to be compassionate as our God is compassionate. Compassion, not cruelty. Generosity of spirit, not greed. Love, not hate, must be our guide in all our decisions, in all of our choices, in all of our lives. I pray you stay safe. Take good care. Take good care of your families. Until we meet again, may we meet in prayer and linger there a while. Have a great week.